There is truly nothing more revealing than watching the British tabloids and sections of the UK media twist themselves into knots trying to humiliate, ridicule, or embarrass Meghan Markle, only to emerge from their own reporting having accidentally confirmed her success in ways they never intended. Because every so-called criticism ends up functioning as a reluctant confession that Meghan has achieved exactly what they hoped she never would: independence, profitability, relevance and power entirely beyond royal control. And the so-called Jam saga is perhaps the clearest and most delicious example of this ongoing self-own, because what was meant to be framed as trivial, laughable, or unserious has instead exposed a level of demand, scale, and business acumen that many long-established brands would envy. And when Meghan herself told Bloomberg that even she expected the products to last weeks, rather than hours, only for them to sell out almost immediately and force conversations to leap from a few thousand jars to purchase orders in the millions, the tabloids were suddenly confronted with a reality they cannot spin away: that Meghan Markle has turned something simple into something scalable, aspirational, and wildly profitable, and that fact alone undermines years of character assassination designed to portray her as incapable, dependent, or delusional, because nothing terrifies entrenched power more than a woman who proves she never needed it in the first place. And this is precisely why the UK media reaction has been so venomous, so obsessive, and so desperate to minimise what is plainly a business success. Because if they acknowledge Meghan's achievement honestly, they must also acknowledge their own failure: their failure to break her, their failure to silence her, and their failure to push her into irrelevance after she stepped away from royal life. And instead of reflection or accountability, they resort to mockery, clinging to the word jam, as if repetition will somehow strip it of its meaning, when in fact, the product itself is irrelevant compared to what it represents, which is autonomy, brand power, and modern influence built without palace permission. And the irony is that every sneering headline only amplifies her reach, because the audience is no longer confined to Britain or to royal watchers, but is global, diverse, and far more interested in entrepreneurship and authenticity than in outdated hierarchies. And this is where the British press fundamentally miscalculates, because they are still operating under the assumption that shame is a useful weapon, that ridicule diminishes women, and that public scorn enforces obedience. Yet Meghan has consistently demonstrated that shame does not work on someone who understands her own value. And instead of retreating, she has leveraged visibility into opportunity, criticism into curiosity, and exclusion into expansion. And the As Ever brand, particularly in association with Netflix and her series with Love, Meghan, is a textbook example of modern brand integration, where storytelling, lifestyle, and personal narrative merge into a cohesive commercial identity, something the tabloids either refuse or are unable to grasp, because acknowledging that sophistication would require admitting that Meghan is strategic, intelligent, and capable of long-term planning, qualities the UK media has spent years denying her. And the fact that her business growth has reached a scale where million-unit purchase orders are even being discussed is not a footnote. It is a rebuke, because it proves that Meghan's audience is not imaginary, not niche, and not driven by novelty alone, but by genuine consumer trust. And this is the ultimate insult to the tabloid narrative, because it means people are choosing Meghan, actively, willingly, and repeatedly, not because of royal proximity, but because of what she offers. And that choice is something the royal family and its media ecosystem are deeply uncomfortable with. Because the monarchy's power has always rested on the idea that relevance flows downward from the crown, never outward or away from it. And Meghan's success disrupts that illusion entirely, because here is a woman who walked away and still commands attention, still drives demand, and still shapes conversations on her own terms. And the British press cannot stand this because it exposes how outdated their gatekeeping has become, how little control they actually have over modern audiences, and how hollow their influence is when it comes to people who no longer seek their approval. And the royal family's role in all of this is impossible to ignore, because their refusal to defend Meghan during her time within the institution sent a clear message that she was expendable, that her well-being mattered less than maintaining comfortable relationships with hostile media, and that silence was an acceptable response to cruelty. And now that same silence echoes loudly as Meghan thrives independently. Because the institution that once benefited from her global appeal, her professionalism, and her work ethic now stands apart, offering neither support nor acknowledgement, a posture that only reinforces the perception that the monarchy struggles to celebrate women who succeed outside its control. And the jam narrative, trivial as the tabloids try to make it sound, actually exposes a deeper discomfort with the idea that Meghan has monetized her identity without deference to royal hierarchy, because for decades, royal women were expected to serve without profit, to sacrifice individuality for image, and to accept scrutiny without compensation. And Meghan's decision to build a business flips that script entirely, because she is no longer offering herself up for public consumption without agency. She is setting terms, controlling output, and benefiting directly from her labour. And this shift is deeply threatening to a system that relied on unpaid emotional work from women while denying them autonomy. And the British media's sneering tone betrays this anxiety, because they are not laughing at jam. They are reacting to the loss of control, to the realization that Meghan has stepped outside the traditional punishment cycle where women are shamed into compliance, and instead has created a feedback loop where attention equals opportunity. And the more they criticize her, the more visible and viable her brand becomes. And this inability to adapt reveals how stuck the UK media is in a past that no longer exists, where royal approval dictated value and tabloids shaped reality. Because in today's world, influence is decentralized, audiences are global, and trust is built through connection rather than permission. And Meghan understands this intuitively, which is why her partnership with Netflix matters, because it places her brand within a global content ecosystem rather than a parochial British media bubble. And this global framing is exactly what the tabloids resent, because it renders them smaller, less relevant, and increasingly ignored. And the jam story becomes a proxy war for all of this resentment, a way to sneer without admitting fear. Because fear is what drives the obsession. Fear that Meghan has succeeded in proving that the monarchy is not the sole pathway to prestige, that British tabloids are not the arbiters of worth, and that women who refuse to be diminished can build something lasting despite sustained hostility. And when Meghan casually mentions that she expected modest demand only to be overwhelmed by it, what she is revealing is not naivety, but humility, a quality rarely afforded to her in media portrayals. And the fact that the conversation jumped so quickly to million-unit orders exposes just how far the tabloids' narrative is from reality. Because this is not a vanity project. It is a serious commercial operation responding to real consumer demand, and the refusal to acknowledge that honestly says everything about the media's priorities. Because they are not interested in truth. They are interested in punishment. And when punishment fails, they escalate mockery. And when mockery fails, they double down on trivialization. Yet none of it works, because Meghan's success exists independently of their approval, and the royal family's continued distance from this reality only deepens the sense that the institution is out of step with modern values. Because instead of recognizing Meghan's achievement as an example of adaptability, entrepreneurship, and resilience, they allow the same hostile narratives to dominate, reinforcing the idea that the monarchy is more comfortable aligning with critics than celebrating growth. And this pattern reflects a long-standing discomfort with women who refuse to be passive symbols rather than active participants in their own lives. And Meghan's flourishing business exposes that discomfort mercilessly, because it forces a reckoning with how much was lost when she was driven away, not just in terms of image, but in terms of potential, innovation, and global connection. And the tabloids' attempt to turn jam into a punchline only highlights how unserious their critique has become. Because when your best insult is mockery of a product that sells out in hours, the joke is no longer on the subject, it is on the critic. And this is the ultimate own goal, because every article meant to embarrass Meghan instead advertises her success, confirms her market power, and reminds audiences that she has transformed scrutiny into strength. And in the end, the greatest humiliation here does not belong to Meghan Markle. It belongs to a media culture and a royal institution that invested so heavily in her downfall that they cannot cope with her prosperity. Because her flourishing business is not just a commercial story, it is a moral one. A story about what happens when a woman refuses to internalize contempt, refuses to disappear on command, and instead builds something meaningful, profitable, and entirely her own. And the more the tabloids rage against that reality, the clearer it becomes that Meghan has already won. Not because of jam, but because she has proven that dignity, success, and power no longer require the approval of those who once believed they could take them away.